the particular quiet of professionals who have just understood the significance of what they are reading. A senior officer, a woman named Admiral Seraphine Cord, with gray threading through dark hair and the composure of someone who had carried enormous weight for a very long time, read the transmission twice, not from confusion, but from discipline. She then turned to her team. "Confirm origin and timestamp," she said. "Confirmed, Admiral. Orion 9. Attack in progress. Confirm first aggressor. All sensor data indicates the Krell fleet fired without provocation." Cord nodded slowly. "Then we have our answer." She did not shout. She did not slam her fist on a console or pace the room in agitation. She simply reached for a secondary keypad, entered a 36-character authorization code from memory, and spoke 4 words to the room. "Activate response protocol, Black." Across Earth and a dozen hidden installation points scattered throughout the outer colonies, places that did not appear on navigational charts and whose energy signatures were carefully masked to resemble background radiation, systems began to wake, not with a fanfare of military mobilization, but with a quiet, inevitable certainty of a mechanism that had been engineered for exactly this moment. Lock files opened. Authorization levels cascaded through encrypted networks. A fleet roster appeared on Admiral Cord's screen. Ships listed under categories marked classified, unrecorded, and in some cases, officially denied to have ever been constructed. These were not patrol vessels. They were not border defenders or diplomatic escorts. They had been built in secret, maintained in silence, and designed for a singular, terrible purpose: to answer, completely and permanently, any aggression against humanity. No speeches were given. No victory music played. Officers simply nodded to one another and began their work. Far from Earth, in cold and distant docks hidden behind asteroid fields and sensor-blocking debris clouds, enormous engines began to warm, not with the bright, visible light of conventional drives, but with something quieter and more fundamental, a distortion of space itself, a gentle bending of the fabric between stars that left no thermal signature and no ion trail. The fleet moved without announcement, without ceremony, without a single wasted moment. In the Krell fleet sensors, nothing changed. They were completely unaware that the universe around them had already shifted. Back at Orion 9, the crew held on. Systems failed and were rerouted. Damage was catastrophic in sections, manageable in others. Medical staff worked in partially pressurized corridors, treating burns and lacerations by the light of emergency panels. Commander Voss moved from station to station, not commanding in the traditional sense, but steadying. His presence alone seemed to slow the panic that wanted to take root. "We hold the core," he told his crew, his voice carrying through the smoke. "We hold as long as we hold." The Krell commander watched the battered station with something approaching admiration, though he would not have named it that. He had expected surrender. These creatures were taking an unreasonable amount of punishment for a facility that clearly could not survive. He found it puzzling and slightly irritating. Then his sensor officer made a sound that commanders learn to dread, the sharp intake of breath that means something has appeared that should not be there. "Commander," the officer said carefully, "I am detecting movement. Inbound. The human rescue fleet, as expected." "No, sir." A pause. "The drive signature does not match anything in our records." The Krell commander stepped forward and looked at the sensor display. The data was strange in a way that was difficult to articulate. The readings were there, clearly present, but they behaved as though space itself was slightly reluctant to acknowledge them. Distances seemed imprecise. Energy signatures were inconsistent with any known propulsion technology. Then the ships appeared. They dropped into normal space without the dramatic energy flare that characterized any FTL transit the Krell had ever witnessed. They simply arrived, as if space had opened politely to receive them and then closed again behind them without comment. Their hulls were dark and utterly plain. No visible weapon arrays. No energy shields casting their telltale glow. No identifying markings of any military tradition. They looked, in truth, like very old ships. Worn, quiet, almost archaeological. The Krell commander stared at them for a long moment. Then, despite himself, he laughed. "Antiques," he said. "They sent us antiques." His amusement spread through the bridge. Perhaps humanity keeps these as museums and decided to make them useful. More laughter. "Hail them. Let us hear what they say before we destroy them. The hails went unanswered. The human fleet did not change course. It did not raise any detectable shields. It did not target the Krell vessels. It did not, in fact, appear to acknowledge the Krell fleet's existence at all. The dark ships simply continued forward in perfect formation, moving with the unhurried certainty of something that already knew exactly where it was going. They passed Orion 9. They did not stop. The confusion on the Krell bridge was immediate and genuine. Officers exchanged uncertain looks. Targeting systems locked onto the human vessels and returned error readings, range data that contradicted itself, mass calculations that made no physical sense. A weapons officer reported that firing solutions refused to stabilize. Why are they ignoring their own station? An officer asked, unable to keep the unease from his voice. No answer came, because no answer existed within the framework of Krell tactical doctrine. Their entire strategic culture was built on the assumption that you defended what you valued. You fought for what mattered. You did not simply pass a burning outpost full of your own people. Unless, a small voice in the Krell commander's mind whispered, unless the outpost was never the point. On the lead human vessel, a ship whose name did not appear in any accessible database, the bridge was hushed and softly lit, suffused with the calm of absolute preparation. Officers monitored their stations without urgency. No one spoke of the Krell fleet they had passed. It was simply not relevant. A navigation marker cycled from amber to green. The captain, a woman whose record technically did not exist, looked at the display and said, with the quiet finality of someone completing a long and unpleasant task, "Course confirmed. Target is not the fleet." In that moment, the Krell commander finally, truly understood that something was very wrong. And far across the light years, on a planet that had never once feared the darkness between stars, an ordinary day was coming to an end. The Krell homeworld was called Vareth Prime in their own language, which translated roughly to the world that endures. It had endured for 4,000 years of recorded civilization through internal wars and the conquest of neighbors and the slow, patient accumulation of an empire. Its cities were vast and ornate, towers that caught multiple suns, transit networks that connected continents, cultural archives that preserved the entirety of Krell artistic achievement. Its people were proud in the specific way of those who have never genuinely been threatened. Children grew up learning that Vareth Prime was a center for which all significance radiated. Defense platforms in geosynchronous orbit bristled with weaponry capable of reducing approaching fleets to debris. Planetary shields, tested and certified, had turned back every simulation the military had ever run. No enemy had ever reached Vareth Prime. The human fleet arrived without a signal. Space above the planet simply changed, a subtle wrongness that lasted less than a second before the dark ships materialized in perfect, silent formation, positioned with geometric precision above the planet's northern hemisphere. Every ship at exactly the right distance. Every angle calculated to an exactness that defied the variables of interstellar travel. Planetary defense sensors went into immediate contradiction. The ships were there, visibly, undeniably there, but their readings made no coherent sense. Mass readings were inconsistent. Energy outputs were minimal. Distances refused to resolve. Military commanders shouted orders across emergency channels. Defense cannons swiveled upward. Shield generators powered to maximum capacity with a deep resonant hum that had always been enough. The human ships released something. Not missiles, nothing with a thermal bloom of an explosive payload. Not energy weapons, no visible beam or pulse. Small objects, dark and geometrically simple, fell away from the human vessels and descended toward the planet with patient gravity. They were almost invisible against the stars. Krell scientists ran analysis after analysis and produced results that contradicted each other entirely. The planetary shields died first, not broken by force, not overwhelmed by superior firepower. Simply turned off, as if the systems that generated them had been quietly informed that their purpose no longer applied, and had complied. Power grids followed, continent by continent, in a sequence that felt almost deliberate, almost considerate, as though something was being careful not to cause unnecessary chaos in the process of causing absolute catastrophe. Cities went dark across Vareth Prime's illuminated night side. The panic began then, raw and immediate and total. The Krell had never experienced this. They had watched others experience it, had studied the psychology of conquered populations with a detached curiosity of conquerors. They had never imagined what it felt like from inside. A desperate transmission reached the human fleet within minutes. It was not composed by the Krell military. It came from their civilian communication authority, a body that had never before had cause to contact an enemy. This was a mistake, the transmission pleaded. The voice carried genuine shock, the specific horror of a civilization discovering, in real time, that its assumptions about itself were wrong. We will withdraw our forces immediately. We will offer reparations. We will negotiate any terms you require. Please, we are prepared to talk. The human flagship received the message. The captain read it. She thought for a moment with a particular quality of someone performing an unpleasant but necessary arithmetic. Then she replied with a single sentence. You attacked a human outpost. Nothing more was said. The object that had fallen through Vareth Prime's atmosphere had settled deep into the planet's geological layer, interfacing with the electromagnetic matrix of the planet's own core in ways that Krell's science would never have time to understand. They did not explode. They did not burn. They simply worked, quietly and completely and without any element of spectacle. The planet's tectonic plates began to move in ways they had not moved in geological memory. Deep fault lines, long stable, suddenly became active. The resonance built slowly at first, then with gathering momentum, like a note being played on an instrument too large to hear. Oceans surged away from continental shelves. The sky above Vareth Prime shifted in color as the upper atmosphere destabilized. First orange, then a deep, bruised red that its inhabitants had never seen in nature and would associate, in their final moments, with a specific shade of their own ending. From orbit, the human fleet watched. No one cheered. No one celebrated. The bridge of the lead vessel was as quiet as it had been when they arrived. Officers observed their instruments. The captain stood at the viewport with her hands clasped behind her back and watched a civilization unmake itself in the span of minutes, and her expression was the expression of someone who has done something they believed was necessary and takes no pleasure in the believing. When Vareth Prime finally went silent, when the geological processes had concluded and the debris field had begun its long dispersal into the orbital plane, the human ships turned away, not slowly, as if reluctant to leave, immediately, as if there was nothing left to see. The Krell fleet at Orion 9 received the final data burst from Vareth Prime, while their commander was still drafting a message of victory to send home. The burst lasted 3 seconds. It contained fragmented sensor data, partial emergency broadcasts, and then nothing, a silence so complete it had its own texture, its own weight. The commander read the data twice, as Admiral Cord had read her message twice, though for entirely different reasons. He did not move for a long time. Around him, his officers processed the same information and arrived at the same incomprehensible conclusion. In the time their fleet had spent attacking a single undefended research station, celebrating, boasting, watching the fires burn in a station that refused to die, their civilization had ceased to exist. Their home, their families, their cities and their culture and their history and their future. Gone, not defeated, not occupied, not forced into surrender and stripped of dignity, the way the Krell had treated others. Simply gone, with a clinical finality of a problem being solved. The fleet did not fight. There was nothing left to fight for, and somewhere beneath the horror, the Krell commander understood, with a terrible, clarifying lucidity, that this had always been the point. Humanity had not come to Orion 9 to save a station. They had come to demonstrate, with absolute precision, the nature of the answer they would always give. At Orion 9, rescue ships arrived hours later. Human medics moved through damaged corridors, their footsteps careful among debris and cooled metal. Survivors were evacuated with gentle efficiency. The wounded were treated. The dead were accounted for with the specific grief of colleagues who will carry names for the rest of their lives. Commander Voss stood at a viewport as the last of his crew was transferred to the rescue vessels. The space where the Krell fleet had been was empty now, not fled, exactly, but dispersed, the ships moving in scattered, aimless trajectories like leaves after the wind has moved on. A young officer appeared at his shoulder. They won't come back, will they, sir? Voss looked at the empty space for a long moment. No, he said quietly. They won't. He paused. But that's not the important part. The officer waited. The important part, Voss said, is that no one else will come, either. News traveled faster than light in the information networks of the galaxy's civilizations, and what news traveled fastest of all was a kind that fundamentally rearranged people's understanding of the world they lived in. The fall of Vareth Prime spread across the galaxy's communication channels within days, carried by trade vessels and listening posts and the old, informal networks that had always served as the galaxy's true nervous system. Ancient empires, in the middle of wars that had consumed generations, paused to process what they were hearing. Councils of species who had considered humanity a minor, peripheral concern, politely tolerated, vaguely patronized, never truly taken seriously, convened in emergency sessions and found themselves at a loss for an adequate framework. A powerful, established civilization had been erased, not over years of grinding warfare, not through the patient accumulation of military victories. In the time it took to mount what should have been a trivial raid on a research station, the attackers had ceased to exist. Recordings of the incident circulated obsessively through alien military academies and strategic think tanks. Commanders and tacticians watched the same sequence repeatedly, the human fleet arriving, the human fleet ignoring the Krell Armada, the human fleet moving past a burning station without hesitation, trying to identify the moment the outcome had been determined. They paused the footage. They ran analyses. They consulted historical precedent. Eventually, the most senior strategic minds in a dozen civilizations arrived at the same conclusion, more or less simultaneously. The war had been over the moment Orion 9's message reached Earth. Everything after that had been consequence. The psychological effect on the galaxy's existing power structures was immediate and profound, though it expressed itself almost entirely in things that didn't happen. Attack plans filed against human territories were quietly archived. Border probes were recalled. Species that had been mapping human space with predatory intent turned their attention elsewhere. No formal announcements were made. No treaties were signed. No one wanted to draw attention to the fact that they were afraid. But the behavior changed. Uniformly, completely. Ships passing through human space reduced their speeds and powered down non-essential weapon systems. Communication protocols shifted toward elaborate courtesy. Even civilizations that had maintained a bristling disdain for humanity suddenly found reasons to establish trade relationships, to open cultural exchanges, to send diplomatic representatives with full credentials and extremely careful manners. On Earth, a single broadcast went out across all channels in every known language. It was not composed by a politician or poet. It was written by a committee of 12 people in a room with no windows, and it had been prepared long before Orion 9 was attacked, updated, and refined over decades in anticipation of a moment exactly like this one. It was not long. We seek peace. We explore. We trade. We build. If you come to us in good faith, you will find us the most reliable partners in the known galaxy. But if you attack our people, any of our people, anywhere, under any circumstances, we will remove your capacity to do it again. This is not a threat. This is a description of how we function. We have no exceptions. We make no distinctions between the powerful and the weak among those who harm us. We do not warn twice. No images of warships. No dramatic music. No list of destroyed enemies. None of it was necessary, because the galaxy already had a recording of Vareth Prime. In the chambers of civilizations that had ruled thousands of star systems for millennia, leaders read the human broadcasts and felt something they were not accustomed to feeling. They felt measured, not threatened, exactly, not intimidated in the way of those faced with superior force. Something more unsettling than that, the sensation of being assessed by something that understood them completely and had decided, calmly and without animus, exactly what they were worth and what they would do. It was a sensation of being seen. Years passed. The galaxy moved on, as galaxies do, through the ordinary, extraordinary business of civilizations growing and declining, and discovering things about the universe and themselves. The Krell were remembered, not as conquerors, not as villains, but as an example, the most efficient cautionary tale in recent galactic history. Teachers in alien academies paused recordings at the same moment every time, the moment the human fleet ignored the Krell Armada and moved past a burning outpost. Right there, they would say, that is when it was already over. Not when the planet fell. Not when the response fleet arrived. The moment they realized the humans hadn't come to fight them. They had come to finish something. At Orion 9, a new station rose where the damaged one had stood. It looked almost identical to its predecessor, simple, practical, unassuming. Scientists cataloged stellar phenomena. Engineers maintained systems. Medics treated minor injuries and boredom-related ailments. Data packages went to Earth every morning. On Earth, the response fleet returned to its cold docks. Ships were sealed. Records were classified behind walls of bureaucratic complexity so thorough that most of the people responsible for maintaining the fleet's existence could not have accurately described what they were maintaining. To the public, to the vast majority of humanity living their lives in peaceable ignorance, nothing extraordinary had happened. A station had been attacked. A threat had been answered. This was not celebrated, because celebration would have required acknowledgement, and acknowledgement would have required explanation, and explanation would have undermined the particular kind of peace that works best when no one thinks about it too carefully. Admiral Seraphine Cord retired 3 years after Orion 9 without ceremony. She received no medal, made no speech. She returned to a small house on a peninsula where the Atlantic met rocky coastline, and spent her mornings watching the sea, which was large and powerful and indifferent in ways she found quietly comforting. She was aware that she had changed the galaxy. She did not think about it very often. Commander Elias Voss went back to Orion 9. Not immediately. There was recovery, debriefing, a period of enforced leave during which he slept an extraordinary amount and ate simple food, and did not think about space. But eventually he went back, because Orion 9 was where his work was, and his work was what he was. On his first night back aboard the new station, he stood at a viewport in the corridor outside his quarters, the same corridor, roughly, where he had stood on the night of the attack, and looked out at the same stretch of stars, quiet and ancient and utterly unconcerned with the small dramas of the species living between them. A junior officer passed and paused, surprised to find the commander standing there in the dark. "Couldn't sleep, sir?" Voss considered the question. "I was thinking about the message," he said. The officer looked uncertain. "Which message?" "The one I sent. 7 words." Voss was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes I wonder if they understood what they were doing when they attacked us. If they really understood what that message would mean. What it would set in motion." The officer had no answer for that. "I don't think they did," Voss said, almost to himself. "I think they looked at us and saw something small and unimportant and poorly defended. I think they made the oldest mistake there is." He paused, mistaking quiet for weakness. Outside the viewport, the stars maintained their ancient, indifferent beauty. "We're not dangerous because we're angry," Voss said quietly. "We're not dangerous because we want to be. We're dangerous because when we decide something has to be done, we do it completely. No theater, no cruelty, no second thoughts." He looked at the stars a moment longer. That's a hard thing for most species to understand, until they see it. He finally looked away from the viewport. "Get some sleep," he said to the officer, not unkindly. "We have work in the morning." He walked back to his quarters and closed the door. The corridor returned to its quiet hum, and beyond the viewport, in the vast and watchful darkness between stars, the galaxy kept its cautious, courteous peace, not because humanity ruled it, not because humanity wanted it, but because every civilization that looked at the stars and thought about what lay in human space eventually arrived at the same conclusion. There were things in the universe you tested once, and things you never tested again. At the far edge of known space, where stars thinned to scattered embers and the galaxy's arm dissolved into darkness, there existed a small human outpost called Orion 9. It was not an impressive place by any measure. No shining towers caught the light of distant suns. No massive battle fleet circled its perimeter like iron walls. Its corridors were narrow and practical, its walls marked by years of cosmic radiation and quiet routine. To most civilizations navigating the galaxy's vast trade lanes, Orion 9 appeared exactly as it was meant to appear, modest, unremarkable, and entirely forgettable. That was, of course, the point. Inside the station, several hundred human crew members went about their days with the calm efficiency of people who had long made peace with isolation. They were scientists cataloging stellar phenomena, engineers maintaining life support and communication arrays, medics who spent most of their shifts treating minor injuries and boredom-related ailments, and a small contingent of security officers whose most dramatic duty was usually settling disputes over meal rations. They were not soldiers. They carried no illusions of military grandeur. Their mission was research, diplomacy, and trade, the quiet, unglamorous work of extending humanity's presence into the unknown. Every morning, the station transmitted a data package back to Earth. Atmospheric readings, trade logs, astronomical surveys. And every morning, Earth acknowledged receipt with a brief automated reply. Nothing unusual ever happened at Orion 9, until the day the Krell came. The Krell Dominion was not a civilization that announced itself gently. Across 40 star systems, their name carried a particular weight of civilizations that had built their identity on conquest. They moved fast, struck without negotiation, and believed deeply that strength was the only language worth speaking. Their ships were angular and brutal, designed not for elegance but for psychological effect. The sight of a Krell fleet emerging from faster-than-light transit had historically produced the same response in most species: immediate surrender. They had been watching Orion 9 for several weeks. The Krell commander, a tall figure with iridescent scales and cold amber eyes, had studied the station's patterns with the detached interest of a predator measuring a sleeping animal. He noted the absence of escort vessels. He counted the defense turrets, undersized, outdated, positioned more for deterrence than genuine combat. He observed the crew's movements through long-range surveillance and saw nothing resembling military readiness. "One station," he said to his officers, the words carrying an almost bored amusement. "No fleet, no fortifications, no meaningful resistance." He paused, letting the simplicity of it settle. "We take it, strip the research databases, and send a message to every human outpost within range. Let them understand what their borders truly mean." His officers exchanged the particular glances of those preparing to do something they consider effortless. They were not wrong to feel confident. They were, however, catastrophically wrong about what mattered. The Krell fleet moving without warning. No declaration, no demand for surrender, no final diplomatic transmission. Energy weapons tore through the dark silence of space and impacted Orion 9's outer hull with devastating force. The station shuddered like something alive and frightened. Alarms erupted through every corridor. Emergency lights bathed the interior in deep crimson. Bulkhead doors sealed with heavy mechanical thuds, and crew members ran to their emergency positions with practiced urgency, but without hysteria. The station's defense guns returned fire, small, precise, painfully outmatched. They bought seconds, not victory. Sections of the outer ring buckled and vented atmosphere into space. Fires broke out in 2 research wings. A team of engineers worked to seal a rupture while smoke thickened around them, their faces illuminated by sparks and the orange glow of burning insulation. Still, the humans did not break. In the command room, surrounded by the noise of a station dying around him, a human officer named Commander Elias Voss sat with remarkable stillness. His hands moved carefully across his console. He did not reach for weapons protocols or evacuation sequences. Instead, he opened Secure Quantum Channel, a direct line to Earth that bypassed every standard frequency and composed a single, unhurried message. It contained 7 words. "Outpost Orion 9 is under attack." He sent it. Then he closed the channel, stood from his chair, and went to help the wounded. The message reached Earth in less time than a breath. It surfaced on a screen in a room that most people on Earth did not know existed, a place buried beneath layers of bureaucratic misdirection, officially designated as a communications relay hub, unofficially known within certain circles simply as a room. It was not a dramatic space. Fluorescent light, rows of consoles, coffee cups going cold. The officers who worked there were unremarkable in appearance and extraordinary in function. When Orion 9's message appeared, the room did not erupt into chaos. It went quiet.